All right, what's up, oil and gas startups world? I feel like I haven't done an oil and gas startups podcast in a while, so it's good to be here. I got my guy Sean with Extreme Performance Chemicals in the house. We're here in the studio, AC's out, so if you're watching video and you see me and Sean start sweating 20 minutes in here, just know that we're here in the trenches. But we're oil fields, so
we ought to be used to it.
Yeah, we're used to it. So, Sean, where are you from? I think that you said that you used to live in Houston, right?
I used to live in Houston when I started out in the oil field back in 94, excuse me.
Cool. And where are you at now?
I'm in Cuero.
In Cuero. So tell me, like, just real quick before we dive into this, what is XPC? What do you guys do?
Extreme Performance Chemicals is kind of it's my third go around with the chemical company. In 2007, I started Fingers Chemical Technologies. We did really well until 2015 when everything went to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah.
At that point, my then fiance and I started another chemical company. I kind of just said, I'm tired of the service side. I can't compete with the Innospecs, the Bakers, the Nalcos, the Champions, those guys. It just wasn't worth it. They commoditized the market to the point that it was a losing battle for a little guy.
Yeah.
And so in 2019, I transitioned and started Extreme Performance Chemicals, basically a manufacturer and wholesaler.
Okay. So you're going to have to school me up on the chemical business. Like, let's make this like a chemical business 101. When you say that you're the manufacturer and the wholesaler, so it sounds like in your previous businesses, in the chemical industry, were you guys the essentially the end user where you're buying chemicals and then helping EMPs with their chemical programs?
Correct.
And so now you're at kind of like the base layer where you're actually manufacturing
Our own.
Okay.
What we ran into is in our chemical business, most of the base chemicals come from 3 or 4 different companies. So it's not about whether the chemistry is going to work or not. It's an application program.
Yeah.
You have to understand your equipment. You have to understand the downhole. You have to understand the end user's goal, and you need to apply that correctly.
Yeah.
What I noticed was happening is there was a big information drop off. You know, what we were taught, or I was taught 20 something years ago, starting out in the chemical business, is these guys, they taught us. You had to go to a school. You went to emulsion school. You went to a foamer school. You learned from guys that are, at that time, I was in my early 30s. I've been in the oil field since I was 21. The older baby boomer generation would take you under their wing and they would teach you.
Mm-hmm.
Now it appears that, from my experience, that nobody's taught anything. They don't want you to know. There are a lot of us guys that worked for Multichem that went out and started their own businesses. Now the industry has gotten to the point where they don't want you to know how to do those things. They want you to rely on somebody in the office to tell you, this is what we want. This is the chemical you use. This is how we do it.
So what you think is that there's a disconnect between field and office operations, where the field isn't picking up on any of this tribal knowledge of equipment, chemical programs, things of this nature, and they just want people out there to essentially, execute while they're getting orders from the office. Is that, because I saw the same thing I saw something similar on the drilling side, where like company men used to make decisions
They don't
on
anymore.
drilling rigs, and they don't anymore. It's all driven from the office.
Starting out on the drilling side and then moving into the production side, the guys in the field used to be able to make that decision. Today, they're not allowed to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, case in point, in 2017, 2018, this chemistry that I've developed, we took to BP. And they did some testing. We did some lab testing with the Sure Labs, Core Lab, things like that. They were really excited about it. And so we're sitting in BP's office here in Houston with the procurement department. They were interested in it, but they wanted us to go through Baker and Nalco. That's who their chemical contract was at the time. My argument is there's a disconnect. You're telling me that you want it, but your guys in the field are telling me that they can't make that decision because you have a chemical contract. Well, that's not the way it's supposed to work. And I was like, I understand that's not the way it's supposed to work. If there's a performance issue, then they have the authority to try something new. So, well, yeah, that's the way our contracts work. Well, what I learned is there's a disconnect between the field and the office, because the guy in the field may want to do that, but somebody in between there in Houston is telling them they can't.
Yeah.
You know, there's relationships that are built into it.
Yeah.
That the guys in the office and on the field level don't want to upset that apple cart. And that became frustrating for me, because we've worked, or at least I have, to be a solutions guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I was working offshore for Coastal Chemical, Apache took over a lot of platforms that they got from BP. So they were flying me around. Hey, can you solve this problem? Or we have this. And I'd get to the platform like, hey, well, you don't need chemical. Your impeller's out on your float cell, or this, your discharge pump is this. Let's go fix the equipment that had been in disrepair. The supervisor asked me, so why aren't you here to sell chemical? Well, yeah, I am here to sell chemical, but I've got 86 platforms I'm responsible in the Gulf. Why do I want to add another chemical account? Let's fix the equipment, optimize that. Then if we need chemical, I will tell you that, and you'll take it to the bank.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of how I've ran my whole business ever since then.
Yeah. You know, we can probably dive in on this topic of like tribal knowledge and knowledge transfer later. You brought up Collide before we got on the podcast, and like, this is a big problem that we're trying to solve with Collide, is this knowledge transfer. But I think that, like, if you look at how the industry used to run, like, I always, like, I feel fortunate because I was like part of the last leg of the old school generation in oil and gas. You know, I got in 2010, still drilling vertical wells before horizontals came in. You know, I always tell people my second day on the rig, we're out there in flip flops, shorts, no hard hats, no shirts, 30 pack of beer. Like, that was like, that's unheard of nowadays, right? So
when I got out of the Navy in 94, I started roughnecking. I mean, I knew that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to get in the oil field. Because in 86, when everything went to crap, all of my dad's friends, my uncles, my family members, they all lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And I watched from 86 to 94, when I got into it, there was nobody my age going into the oil and gas.
Yeah.
And so it was like, well, if I get in now and I learn these aspects from the ground up, from worm corner all the way to wherever I decide to do, I'm going to be successful.
Man, that's super interesting because, yeah, I mean, you had this huge bimodal distribution because of in the age of the workforce. You had boomers, you've had millennials, and there's not a lot of Gen X because of the 80s.
There's very few, because
80s downturn.
The 80s downturn ran everybody out of it. Nobody wanted to get into it. And when I was working in the chalk, you know, when I first started roughnecking, it was chalk business.
Yeah. You
know, we're drilling under balanced horizontal wells. We're flaring while drilling. I mean, we're rocking and rolling.
Yeah.
And so I was broke in. I didn't drill any vertical wells.
Yeah.
They were all horizontal back then.
That's crazy.
You know,
yeah.
UPR, Chesapeake,
yeah.
You know, Sonat. There was all these guys that don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a big deal.
Yeah. No, that's it is crazy to think that y'all were drilling horizontals, you know, that early on.
The mid 90s, UPR started drilling some exploratory wells in Lavaca County, just outside of Shiner. And we in our vertical section, we'd take big gas kicks. And then we'd lay out in the horizontal, and it'd be a dead well.
Yeah.
We're like, well, we're taking big gas kicks. Well, now you know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
It was Eagle Ford.
Yeah.
You know, nobody knew it was there back then.
Nobody knew that was
like we missed it by 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like, well, it was here all along,
Probably
guys.
lots of regret there. It's like, damn, we could have been on that. So you go into the Navy. What did you do in the Navy?
I was a fire controlman.
Okay, cool.
Which is basically electronics tech. So we in the Navy, a fire controlman's job is to calculate your firing inputs. So on a battleship, you've got to, here's your target, this is your distance, this is your radar signature. You got to do all the calculations. And about the time I was doing that, they decided to retire the battleships.
Oh.
So I was like, well, this is not going to be very much fun anymore.
Yeah.
So then I classed up to Tomahawk cruise missiles.
Oh, cool.
And so about the time I was finishing A school in Chicago was when Clinton cut the military budget. So they came to a bunch of us that were fixing to graduate. It's like, look, we don't have room for you. We're not going to be able to honor your contract. What do you want to do? So what are the options? Well, you can reclass to nuclear. And I did not want to go on a sub. And I didn't want to be on an aircraft carrier. Too many people, too big, too much.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, what's my other option? I said, well, you can take an early out and get full benefits with the GI Bill and everything else. Sign me up. I'm out.
Doesn't sound like a bad deal.
No. So I did 1/6 of my enlistment, got all the electronics training, came back to Texas and was like, oh boy, now what?
Yeah.
And so I started roughnecking. On my days off, a friend of mine worked for Power Chokes.
It's such a just Texas thing. It's like, I'm just going to go roughneck. It's what I did out of high school. It's like, I'm going to go roughneck.
And back then it was only $11 an hour. Yeah. I mean, so it was like, well, it's good money. I can get 7 and 7. Then I go to work on the rig and it's 8 and 4. And I'm like, oh, this is not fun at all.
Yeah.
So on my days off, I'd help a buddy of mine with Power Chokes. So we drive all over East Texas, South Texas, installing chokes. And I got to be pretty good at that. And one day we're riding down the road and he's like, hey, maybe you ought to go work for MD Totco with all your electronics training. I was like, wow. They were like, they're the ones that have all the PVTs on the rig you're on. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Came into Houston, had a meeting with a guy named Bobby Stinnett. And he said, man, you just don't have enough roughneck experience yet. He said, I'll call you in 6 months. 6 months of the day, the phone rang. He said, hey, what are you doing now? And I
must have written down a note or something to call you back.
Said, I'm roughnecking for H&P. He said, where at? And I said, in the chalk. He said, okay. He said, can you be here in the morning? Yeah. And then that was it. So that's where I started out, from a drilling hand to a service hand.
That's awesome. And so did that move you up to Houston when you took that job?
It took me from College Station to Houston, and I lived with my aunt in Sugar Land. So I was going offshore, East Texas, wherever they wanted to send me.
Yeah. Were you just covering, I mean,
I was
all basins or?
I wouldn't call it the B team, but I was a floater.
Yeah.
And, and at the time, I'm 21 years old, right out of the Navy.
Yeah.
And everybody I was working with were late 30s. We had one guy we called Grandpa. Well, one day he had gray hair, wears coverall. Of course, back then, everybody wore coveralls.
Yeah.
I was like, well, Mike, how old are you? He said, I'm 36.
You call
why are we calling you Grandpa?
Damn, I'm about to turn 35 next month, and you call me Grandpa.
But that's back then. That's what it was. That's where we were in the oil field. I'm 21 and going to work with these guys that are mid 30s, late 30s, and their 40s.
It's actually kind of like that similar to my story, because when I got moved to Houston, I was 24. I took a job as a project manager running expandable casing for this company that's owned by Shell. Their name's Inventure. And it was me. And I would also say I was on the B team. And then you had all these other senior guys that, I mean, the youngest guy after me is probably 38, and 38 up to 60.
Yeah. And you're the guy that's still young.
Yeah.
And can go and do everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I was. I mean, hey, call Sean, and then I'd be out 24, 36 hours at a time.
And I took that job in 2014. So going into that downturn, probably happened 6 months after I got hired. And unfortunately, a big portion of our company was laid off, and they kept me because I was cheaper than all the other guys. And like, you call me out
and you wouldn't say no.
Yeah, I wouldn't say no. You call me out any time of the night, any day, and I was there. And so, that's interesting, because that's how I felt in that position as well.
And that's there's a good thing to it and there's a bad thing to it. The bad thing to it is if you always say yes, you forget what life is outside of this business.
Yeah.
And I did it where I'll take these jobs. These guys got families. I don't. Let them go home. They've paid their dues. I'll go do it.
Yeah.
Well, then I got so good at it that I never got, I had satellite offices.
Yeah.
Here's your area. You go take care of it. And nobody ever came to help.
Yeah.
And, the downside of that is you don't get to rub elbows.
Yeah.
You don't get to go to the golf tournaments. You don't get to go to the skeet shoots. You just don't have time for it.
Yeah.
You're the guy that they're sending all over the place to solve the problems.
Yeah.
They can't afford to pull you out of the field.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy because like, I don't like being away from my kids now, like more than 2 days, and I start missing them. And I think about when I was a hand, I'd be gone for months. And, I come back home and my kids were little back then, toddlers, babies, and you spend 2 months away from your kids while they're under 2 years old. It's like they're a whole new person when you get back.
They're not the same person
when you get back home,
when you
but
left.
like, I think about this all the time. It's like, I didn't know any better. Like, that was just like, I was just like used to it. That was life for me. Right. And so, and now like I'm a fucking spoiled podcaster now, like I spend more than 2 days away from my kids and I miss it, but it is just like, I didn't know any different, back then.
Well, that's for me being in this 30 something years now, my daughter's only 7 years old. So I had a surprise in my mid 40s.
Yeah.
Like, oh, guess what? I'm like, And I tell people all the time, she is the best thing that I never wanted.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want kids. I think the world's too screwed up and we're all morally corrupt. It just I don't want kids. I don't want to bring a kid in this world, but she is the one thing that the man upstairs knew I needed.
Yeah.
And, you know, the flip side of that is I have a brother that's 4 years younger than me. I've got more than that, but he worked in the oil field. So about the time I went to work in the oil field in the mid-90s, he quit school and that's what he started doing.
Yeah.
Well, he was a tool pusher for H&P, drilling those chalk wells. I mean, not chalk wells, the Eagleford wells and all that. His kids grew up without him. And I have my kid. He's like, man, you did it all wrong. You're 44 years old. Now you got to worry about a kid and all this other stuff. About probably a year ago, he's like, hey, I think you did it right. He said, my kids grew up and I was gone 6 months out of the year. He said, you're there.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like you. I mean, I'm not with her mother.
Yeah.
But man, I get her on Thursdays and then every other weekend.
Yeah.
And I look forward to it.
But
I don't like not seeing my kid.
Isn't it crazy? You know, not to get all personal and sentimental here, but you think you don't want kids and then you have one and it unlocks a level of love and empathy that you didn't know existed. And so
it completely changes you.
Yeah.
Your whole perception.
You think changes. You don't want kids, but you don't know what you don't know. Right. And so that's awesome, man. Like, and you know, to your brother's point, like I had my first kid when I was 19 years old. I remember it. I wake up 4:30 in the morning. I'm getting ready to go out to the rig. My wife texts me at 5 o'clock as I'm in the crew truck driving out. It's just a picture of a positive pregnancy test. I'm a 19-year-old kid. Dude, I'm fucking scared shitless.
Like, oh crap, now what I gotta do?
Yeah.
Like, this is not how I wanted to start my day.
I'm thinking about it all day on the rig, 12-hour tower. And I remember, I was actually just telling my wife this story. It's like, I remember my tool pusher, because you got to think about it. I wasn't even old enough to buy a beer. I'm just getting hazed like a motherfucker on the rig, right? Like these guys bully the hell out of me. And I remember my tool pusher, I heard him. He's like, Colin's about to be a dad. He's like, he's going to realize that he's a real grown ass man. He's going to come back out here and kill every one of you motherfuckers. And I need to reach out to him sometime because I was like, dude, you're so right. Like I did, like I became a man. But I also don't think that there is a right or wrong time to have kids. Like, like there's some benefits to me having kids. It's like I'm young. It's like I'm gonna be 42 and an empty nester. But like also to that point, it's like I miss a lot of my kids' childhood, working and grinding it out. And so there's probably no right or wrong answer.
No. And that's for me, that's the one thing I take solace in is if I'd have had a kid 20 years ago, he or she would be grown and I'd have missed most of their life. Because even if I wasn't gone, everything I did had to do with work. It was everything's work.
Yeah.
Work came first, phone rings.
Yeah.
I mean, I still struggle with that with my kid.
Yeah.
Dad, who's calling? What's this? What's that? It's like, quit worrying about the phone, honey.
Yeah.
Well, what are we doing all day? We're going to do whatever comes along.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Why don't we have a set routine? It's like, because I've been in the oil field for 30 years. It doesn't matter what you plan. When that phone rings, your plans go to shit.
Yep.
So let's just enjoy the moment and make the best of what we have.
It's funny. When I worked at Inventure, I mean, I was on call 24/7, 365. And so I could have a lunch planned with you and I could get called out an hour before that lunch and I'm gone for 2 months. And when I quit my job at Inventure, the first thing I did is I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I was like, and it's been like that ever since. Like ask anyone, I do not answer my phone. And so
there's some liberty in that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of makes you feel free.
Yeah. I quit my job 6 years ago. So I think I'm starting to get over that, where it's like, I'll let my phone ring and answer it again. But man, there was some scar tissue there for a long time where it's like, and I love, dude, I loved my job, man. And I love working in the oil field, but like every time that phone rang, like it didn't matter. I'd die inside a little bit because you just knew what it was.
When you went through the Eagleford boom, the shell boom.
Yeah.
Everything changed. I mean, it was the Wild West.
Dude,
it was 2 hours from here. There was so much just whatever you wanted to do, you could do it. Nobody cared what the cost was. Let's just go. And then it all came crashing down in 2015. But for 4 years, I mean, I was the same way. My uncle was a customer and he worked for Comstock. He did all their tie-ins and everything. And he'd call and I'd be like, oh man, I don't want to answer his phone call. Like, this cannot be good. And 9 times out of 10, he was just calling to shoot the shit. But when that phone rang and it said Uncle Philip, it was like,
your heart just sinks.
What did one of my guys do? What did they forget to do? What chemical pump is down? or what well did they forget to hook up? And I thought, oh, I'm going to get an ass chewing.
Yeah.
And in most time, it was just him calling to just bullshit.
You know what's funny is I've always kept my Midland number. I've got a 432 area code. And so sometimes I call people. They don't have my number. They think I'm some company man or someone calling them. And so they want to answer my call. But yeah, I think everyone that works in the oil field has like can relate to that 100%. Yeah. So, you know, with XPC, let's talk about the business for a minute. So manufacturing chemicals, you decided, hey, the industry and being a provider has become too cutthroat, too commoditized, too hard to compete with the big companies out there that just have economies of scale. They can run at lower margin than mom and pops can. So you go a layer under and you say, hey, we're going to become a manufacturer. Tell me, like, why was that attractive to you in manufacturing chemicals?
So during the whole Eagle Ford boom, when it kicked off, being in DeWitt County, being from there, 7th generation Texan, we got family friends and owned thousands of acres, big ranches down there. So when Geo Southern started drilling, I said, hey, can I come out and get some oil samples? So I was kind of trying to see a crystal ball, like what's going to be the problem in the Eagle Ford. Mm-hmm. So I'd go around these different ranches in DeWitt, Gonzales, Karnes County, pulling samples. Well, at one point, Colin, I had a whole wall full of oil samples, and it looked like a Gatorade deal. It was all different, every different color under the sun that was there. But the one thing that kept showing up when the temperature got below 70 degrees was paraffin. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, these guys are going to realize they got a paraffin problem.
Yeah.
So I started playing with different paraffin inhibitors, building my own. I came up with 3 proprietary blends. Then I get introduced to this chemist. He calls me out of the blue, out of Houston. He says, hey, I got this chemical. I think you need to try it. Okay. I said, what's it do? And he said, well, it'll knock out H2S. So you know what? I've got a good location out in Karnes County that we can try this on. Put this chemical out there to knock out H2S. Well, we'd be hovering around 5,000 parts. Then it go to 0. Then it go to 5,000. Then it go to 0. Mm-hmm. So after a 2-week trial, the gauger's out there, and I was like, hey, you know anything different about this well? He said, other than you trying that new chemical to knock out H2S? He said, no. And I was like, well, when's the last time you hot oiled? Well, as a matter of fact, we haven't hot oiled the whole time you've had that chemical on here. And I said, well, let's shut it in. Let's open up the choke. We opened that thing up, and there was absolutely 0 paraffin buildup. And before it paraffined up in 6-7 days.
Yeah, just be clogged up. Yeah.
Like, whoa, we might be onto something. So I took this chemical that this chemist brought to me, started adding it to my paraffin inhibitors. Well, Katie barred the door at that point. By February of 2015, Phoenix Chemical was treating 1.5 million barrels a month of BOE throughout all of South Texas.
Nice.
And we were rocking and rolling. I mean, I had 4 delivery trucks. We had a second location in Freer that we were taking care of Tilden area with, mm-hmm. and in the valley. And treater truck, we had everything.
Like area, I mean, like H2S was huge problem out there. I mean, those wells are
knocked out the
sour.
H2S. I mean, a BOE, when you're calculating chemical BOE, that's your barrel oil equivalent, and that's your whole chemical spend across the board.
Yeah.
You know, we do quarter reports for all of our customers, breaking it down. We averaged about 71 cents per barrel of a chemical program cost. Mm-hmm. You know, at 1.5 million barrels a month BOE, I mean, I was doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Maxis had did a study for Murphy at the time, and Murphy's chemical spend was $4 to $6 a barrel.
Oh, wow.
BOE equivalent.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, you know, oil's doing this. It's going to slow down. We're fixing to just really take off.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to accelerate when everybody's losing business. We're going to grow. Yeah. I get a call one day and it's like, hey, I hate to do this to you, but Nalco and Multicam are fixing to get all your accounts. Like, why? Well, they came in, they can sell us chemical for $15 a gallon and you're 26. Like, okay, you know, I understand that, but let's not just give them everything. That particular company went from a 1.5 million barrel deal at 71 cents, about $800,000 a month chemical spend. Before they sold their field, they were at $2.6 million a month. Wow. And they had lost 30% of their production.
3X there.
It was, and that was across the board, and it still exists this day because procurement came in and they're not looking at your total performance cost. They're looking at a per barrel cost. So that's why I said, I can't compete with this anymore.
Yeah.
These guys are, they can buy more raw material. They can manufacture it cheaper.
Yeah.
And they're willing to play the merry-go-round of we'll sell it at this price that the operator wants, and we'll keep it for a year or two, and then we'll lose it to the next guy, and then we'll get it back in a couple more years.
Yeah, they have the balance sheet to be able to play that game, and economies of scale where they can buy product cheaper. And a
little independent like me couldn't do that. So at that point, I basically was given full control of this chemistry. And I was like, okay, I'm using it for this. I figured out how to put it in my foamers. The chemistry is not just a standalone chemistry, but it can also be an additive for conventional chemistries. So we started doing different testing. What will it do if we use it for this way? If we add it to this, how can it boost performance or increase our margins? And I figured out how to take what he had done and make it better and apply it in different ways. And about that time is when Nissan came out with the NanoActive HRT. What was funny is they were in negotiations with us for us to provide the base chemical for their product.
Who'd you say it was?
Nissan. And so I'm like, wait a minute.
And Nissan, the
chemical company.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was saying Nissan,
not
the vehicle.
Zoom.
I was like,
drop.
It's like, this is a weird twist on the story.
Yeah. So and for me at the same time, it was like, what's Nissan? They're a car company. What are they doing asking us for chemical samples? I mean, this is ridiculous. And turned out it was Nissan Chemical USA. So they were kind of playing games with us. And I think what they were trying to do is reverse engineer what we had.
Yeah.
And then they released this HRT, this flow back aid chemistry. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Mine does the same thing. And so we started doing some tests and comparisons with Nissan, and we just basically blew them out of the water. And that went really well for a while, right up until the whole BP deal and the Nalco Champion. And what was funny is when we sat down with Nalco and Champion, we had all the NDAs, non-disclosures, confidentiality agreements in place. Donna Cole, which is a mentor of mine, owns Cole Chemicals. She's the one that set the meetings up. We go into the office and verbatim, both of those companies sat across the table like we're sitting right now and said, look, if this chemistry does exactly what you say it does, it'll bastardize 3 or 4 of our revenue streams. We're not interested in this at all. And it seems like ever since then, it's gone downhill. So our focus at that point became, let's get it in the fracs. If we can go from a 15%, or I've seen numbers as low as 7% recovery in Eagle Ford. All of our testing was done on Eagle Ford chips to prove that we can mobilize more oil. We were at 56% increase over the Nissan product. And the testing that we've had done through independent labs puts us in the 65 to 75% ultimate recovery.
Wow.
And so at that point, this is 2019, 2020, we did some fracs in the San Andreas up in Gaines County.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie to you, I was nervous. We were working through Quantum Valves and Service at the time. They've since gone under, but they were the distributor I had. We got into 4 fracs out there. The first one we did at 2 GPT. The second one they did at 2 GPT. The third one they did at 1, and the last one they did at half a gallon GPT. I was nervous for the simple reason that we're testing the Eagle Ford. It's 80% or 85% oil wet. The San Andreas, it is mostly water wet. I'm like, man, we may not be pumping enough for this to activate. The first well did 400% better than the offset well. Second well, 300%. Third well was about 100 and 120%. The last well, the oil production, the one they did at half a gallon GPT, was no change versus the offset wells, but it came in at 400% increase in gas. I mean, it was like, oh, this is great. Quantum then took that data to EOG. EOG looked at 10 days flowback data and said, we're going to use it in every well in Eagle Ford. We want to do a 3-well pad first, and if it performs half as good as it did on these San Andreas wells, we're going to use it on everything. So I built all the chemical, got it ready to go. 3 weeks later, guess what happened? COVID.
Oh, jeez.
Lost it. And I was sitting there, I was like, oh, this is going to be a big deal because it's a monkey see, monkey do business.
Yeah.
If we can increase recovery just for EOG in the Eagle Ford,
10
or 15% initially, I mean, then they're gonna take it to West Texas.
Yeah.
Then when everybody figures out what they're doing in West Texas, Diamondback,
Just
Oxy, they're all gonna
compounds,
fall in line.
Yeah.
And at that point, I figured I won't own this business but a couple of years, and I'll be out.
Yeah.
I'll have a 60-foot boat again. I'll be traveling around the Caribbean chasing blue marlin. Yeah. That didn't happen because of COVID.
Yeah.
And it's been a struggle ever since.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. The part of building businesses in this industry, or just working in the industry at all, is like super high pain tolerance, just getting kicked in the balls repeatedly. I laugh, like you look at someone my age, turning 35. It's like experienced 3 major downturns in my career. You look at someone my equivalent age that works like in Silicon Valley in tech, this last year to 2 years is their first downturn ever experiencing. It's like an oil and gas, like, it's kind of like you look over at them. It's like, oh, it's your first time. Like we're used to this. And so, it's just like, it's painful. Cause like, it's like you get onto something and then COVID hits and all of a sudden like the opportunity just goes away and it's something outside of your control, which sucks. But
and that's the biggest difference that I see, especially in South Texas after doing this since 1994, is I used to be able to walk into a customer's office, an operator, and like, build a relationship with them. They'd give you the time of day. They'd open up. First you had to start talking about, do you have kids? What do you like to do?
Yeah.
Once you built that rapport, you could walk in and it's like, well, what's your pain point?
Yeah.
And they tell you, well, I've got this problem over here and I've got this company taking care of it, but it seems to be a continuous problem. I was like, well, if you'll give me an opportunity, I'll try. Give me 30 days. If I can solve the problem, give me more business and you pay for what I did. If I can't, no harm, no foul. Well, I'll go on down the road and we'll just see if we can fix something somewhere else. Those opportunities don't exist anymore. Since the Eagle Ford came in and all the majors came in, you're not getting through that door. Mm-hmm. It is a corporate mindset of this is who we use. This is why we use them. And for me, as a chemical guy with 31 years of oil field experience, 25 years in the chemical business now, it's frustrating because I'm seeing the same chemistry and the same applications and the same damn problem today that I saw 20 something years ago.
Yeah.
It's like a pharmaceutical business. They're not trying to fix the problem. They're just trying to cycle the money around. That's why I call it a merry-go-round. Yeah. There's no use. If you're not willing to solve the problem, then why are we doing this? I mean, how can you justify spending millions of dollars on chemical to have the same problem all day, every day? Yeah. And then you go in and say, well, we only want to spend 3 cents a barrel. Like, well, you've got some arbitrary number picked out of the blue sky that you can't solve the problem that way. Yeah. And there's the whole thing during the Eagle Ford, when we had our run up with Fingers Chemical, I knew that eventually it was going to come crashing down. Not because of the market, but as those wells depleted and died off, you could not economically do it with chemical alone. And that was that the writing was on the wall. Sooner or later, the money we were making off pumping chemical was going to go away. Yeah. Because it's just simple economics. Yeah. If you're making, 200 barrels a day on a well where you were making 2,000 and now you went for example, I went down to South Texas last week and I went by a well that we had back in 10 years ago when they drilled it. When that well came on, it was 3,400 barrels a day and making 36 barrels of water. Stopped by there the other day, that swabbing unit on it. Well, guess what? They're making 1,000 barrels a day total fluid and only 100 barrels of oil. That's how much it's changed. So at this point, it's not economical for anybody to put chemical downhole. Yeah. Or treat on the surface because they're just not moving enough oil to justify that chemical program. Yeah.
Do you think, and this is going to be a dense question for me because I'm just not familiar with chemicals and well performance, but are good chemical programs critical for longevity in wells, just like that example that you brought up where, initial production of that well is 3,000 barrels. Now it's doing 1,000 barrels, but only 100 barrels of oil. Do you think good chemical programs help the ultimate recovery of that well over its lifespan of 10 years?
Ultimately, if you manage your chemical program, understand completely what's happening downhole and the chemistries that you're using to try to combat the issues or increase recovery, those are eventually going to cause problems. You know, the oil field is a reactive business. You know, I like to say this, the chemical guy is your best friend when times are good, and he's the asshole when times are bad. And part of the reason I got out of the service side is, as a chemical guy, I'm the first one called, the first one blamed, and the last one paid. You know, it's kind of like, well, what's the, you know,
what's the good part?
Well, where's the good part in this anymore? You know, so if I go out and, you know, you've got an oil well, and I'm treating your oil, put an emulsion breaker in there, for example, for you to be able to sell that oil, you get paid 25th of the following month. Why am I waiting 90 to 120 days to get paid on that chemical that you use to sell it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's crazy about just all oil field services business, not even just chemicals, but just net 90 payment terms and just like the cash flow crunches. I mean, it's hard.
Well, the service companies are now the banks. And, you know, if we try to increase our price to cover that money we're losing waiting on it for 3 months or longer, then we get run off. I mean, it's not what have you done for me today?
Yeah.
What you do? It's what did you do for me today?
Yeah.
Versus what have you done for me for the last 10 years?
Yeah.
You know, and it's a
tough business.
That's what led me to, number one, get out of the service side. You know, I'm running up and down the highway. The pump goes down. These guys got gaugers. Well, it's their pump. We sell them the pump. That's their asset. Why are you calling me at 6 o'clock in the evening to tell me, hey, the pump's down? I mean, yeah, I don't make money if the pump's not working, but why can't these guys be taught how to work on a simple Helios or Texam, whatever, solar powered pump? Change the packing, change the timer, do whatever you got to do. Yeah. It's their asset.
Yeah.
You know, if you want your program to be optimized, you've got to take ownership with it. I mean, you already own the asset, so what's the point?
Yeah.
So I'm sitting here fighting this business where I don't have the bandwidth or the energy. You know, when I started on my own in 2007, I was 34 years old. I'm 52 now. You know, I don't want to spend all day driving 3.5 hours in one direction. Like when I go to West Texas, it's 7.5 hours to go take care of one customer.
Yeah.
I might be there 30 minutes. I might be there 3 hours.
Yeah. It's an 8-hour drive all day long.
You know, and so with the chemistry and the data that we've collected in the wells that we've treated, the assets that, you know, I've got friends of mine that have bought to increase production, I was like, how do I get this ball rolling again? So that's when I went out and found this hydrogen peroxide steam unit to bring into the game, because I've got the chemistry. I just don't have the tool to get these operators to go, hey, this guy can do something special and one above just chemical. So like, well, this is going to open up some doors. Well, it hasn't. No, not one operator in South Texas is willing to say, hey, there's a new technology. There's a new way to do things to improve our production chemically and physically to increase our recovery.
What was this piece of equipment that you mentioned?
It's I want to best describe it as it's Nazi technology. I mean, these engineers and the people that developed this, they looked at old Nazi technology, how to convert hydrogen peroxide to steam. And it's nothing new. People have been doing it for years. They spent the money and the research to build this unit that does not allow any hydrogen peroxide to escape the catalyst chamber. You know, one of the things we use hydrogen peroxide as an oxidizer. You get that down hole and it comes back and hits a heater treater or something, you got a bomb. Mm. You know, so they spent the resources and the time to develop this piece of equipment. And then once they did it, of course, COVID hit then too. So they just mothballed it. And I had a customer reach out to me about 1.5 years ago and said, hey, you know anything about steaming wells? Like, yeah, I do. I worked up in Canada on the SAGDs. He said, well, do you think there's any piece of equipment out there that can be mobile and we can move around to some of these underperforming wells? I was like, actually, I do know of a piece of equipment. Let me reach out to the guys that have it and see what we can work out. It took about 6 months. You know, they finally agreed to send, you know, for me to come get the equipment and get it up and running. And we had 100 wells lined up to treat in Milam County, those little shallow 500, 600, 800 foot wells. The customer that I had basically just that they had an illegal operating company. Since when they first contacted me about it, said we took over it, all the legal stuff is behind us. we get ready to go up there, and I say, look, I need a mobilization fee. They're just, something doesn't feel right. You pay me a mobilization fee, I'll come up there and I'll do the first 10 wells. Halfway through, you pay me the second, third, and then I'll give you terms on the last third of money. Well, we don't have it. I'm like, okay, well, I've been busting my balls trying to get this thing operational, lined out, make sure everything works on it to treat your wells. That never happened. Now I found out they're under investigation by the FBI and SEC for securities fraud, things like that. I'm like, well, let's check that box. I'm glad I didn't go do that work. But that was
a bullet there.
That's kind of the mindset is between this chemistry that I have and the steam unit is if I can go down and treat a well that we've done countless wells now where we just pump it and dump it, let the well sit, and we're getting 200, 300, 500% increases in production. Well, what if we can now apply that chemistry, then come back with steam, chase it down whole, expand it, and get it further back in the formation? What will it do then?
Yeah. So the whole idea here is like a combination between a chemical program and a physical piece of equipment. And so inject your chemical down whole and then come back behind it with steam and essentially flush it.
Kind of like basically creating a mobile SAGD, steam assisted gravity drainage. I mean, you get the heat back up there. We can go up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, 1500 PSI. Some of these big Eagle Ford wells, I don't think it's the key. Yeah. Because we can't get far enough out. We could probably get down to the vertical section in the heel, but we're not going to be able to get the lateral.
So this technology you're still wanting to take to market and get it out there?
It is. And so the two in conjunction, I think, are really going to change the ball game. These older wells, kind of like the ones that you guys had bought up in Oklahoma.
Yeah, don't bring those up.
That's where I'm going next
week.
Those up. I've got a guy in Oklahoma that's got 15 wells, and we're taking the unit to Oklahoma.
Nice.
We're going to steam his 15 wells.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to wrap up this podcast. Is I have lots of engineers that listen to this show. Lots of them in production. And so if someone's listening to this, and they want to check it out, who are the types of people or companies that you're looking to potentially partner up with and try out this program?
The best customer for this type of equipment and this program would be an independent, that's got anywhere from 9,000 foot and shallower wells where we know we can treat that.
Yeah.
This particular piece of equipment was used in Lake Pontchartrain by Chevron to clean pipelines. They went out and cleaned the whole field in a day on a barge, where they had spent countless hours and money and time trying to clean the paraffin out of these lines that they couldn't get. Just recently, we were working with an MSA with Marathon to start using it on their non-piggable assets.
Yeah.
Well, the MSA was in the middle of getting done. Then we get a notification. Now, guess what? We're being bought out by COP.
Yeah.
And that's all that stuff goes on hold until the merger's done.
Yeah. Yeah. So independent operators, sounds like shallow conventional assets is a really good fit because, you can run a program on that. Base independent, or is it just anywhere? It could be
anywhere.
Oklahoma, Gulf Coast.
It's got wheels.
Yeah.
It's offshore certified. It can be lifted.
Cool.
It's ASME stamped, it coded, everything's, it was approved and tested by the 4 majors.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal.
Yeah.
When Exxon says it meets our specs, Chevron meets our specs, Oxy, Shell, then it can go anywhere.
Cool.
Right now it's sitting on a 40-foot gooseneck, so it's mobile.
Cool. No, it's super interesting, and also just love to get to hear your background, learn more about the chemical business, where the chemical kind of current status of the chemical industry and oil and gas. And it's interesting to hear about a new way of approaching things, both through the chemistry, but then also, potentially a new way to inject it and distribute it. So,
what the operators are facing now is what's your alternative? If you've got a well building paraffin and sticking rods, you've got to pull it, you've got to paraffin cut it, you've got to do this, or you've got to hot oil it. Well, what are you doing on a low pressure well? When you heat anything, you're hot oiling or putting hot water down it. You're putting extra hydraulic pressure on that well. Now you've got to recover. You've got to lift that. You've got to get that out of the way before you can get your recovery. Well, with steam, you're not adding that extra pressure. You don't have any hydraulic pressure.
Yeah.
Yes, some of it's going to convert to water, but you're talking minuscule amounts compared to 100 barrels of hot oil, 100 barrels of oil you've got to put back in the ground to try to recover.
Yeah.
You know, it makes perfect sense to me after doing this 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's less invasive than fluids. So it's just been getting the word out that the equipment's available.
Yeah.
And we can do the jobs.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this podcast helps you get some people thinking and gets the word out. You know, if you're listening to this right now and you're running chemical programs or you're in production, reach out to Sean and check this out. It sounds like it's something that's really interesting. Obviously, the dude has a shit ton of experience in oil and gas. So if nothing else, you can talk to him and learn something. But Sean, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. This is great.
Well, Colin, I appreciate you guys having me. I mean, for me being the old school guy now, you know, a Gen Xer, you know, I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to come in here and listen and ask questions and try to get the word out that there are better ways, and it's not always wrapped up into the big names.
Yeah. No, absolutely, man. I mean, this is what it's about, is having a place to facilitate ideas and get new technology out there. And so, and you know, it's cool getting to sit across from the table and learn from guys like you that have a ton of experience. So appreciate you taking the time. Guys, if you're listening, guys and girls, if you're listening, we'll make sure to drop any links in the show notes so you can check that out. And make sure to share this with a friend. If you're friends with someone at an E&P or that owns some wells that you think they'd be interested in it, make sure to share it with them, and we'll catch y'all on the next episode. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Colin.